All right, let's practice some sentences. I'm going to prompt you with 5 English sentences based on the grammar from Unit 1, Lesson 19. And it's going to be your job to try to translate those sentences into Korean. The first sentence I would like you to try is, I want to cut the bread thinner. I'll give you 10 seconds and you can start now. Okay, the subject of the sentence is I, so I'm going to start by putting this here. Now, using the knowledge that you've learned in every lesson up until lesson 19, you could very easily create the sentence, I want to cut the bread, and then thinner is sort of what you learned in this lesson. So if I just want to write the sentence, I want to cut the bread, I can easily do that, and I can do that right now for you. The object of the sentence is the bread, so I'm going to include this here, bang. As I said, that's the object, so I'm going to include the object particle on it. Now, if I want to indicate that I'm going to be cutting the bread, what I want to do is use the word 자르다. So it's 자르다. But as you learned in a previous lesson, if you want to indicate that you want to do an action, what you should do is take off 다, and you should add 고 싶다. Now, 싶다 would be the dictionary form of the verb, or actually it's an adjective. I should have said the dictionary form of the word. 싶다 is actually an adjective, and it's conjugated as an adjective, but I'm going to apply the informal high respect honorific, which I usually do in my sentence videos. So I'm going to end it with just 싶어요. Now, this sentence right now simply says, I want to cut the bread. If I want to indicate that I want to cut the bread thinly, not thinner, but thinly, I can use the adjective 얇다. 얇다. Now, that's just the dictionary form of the adjective. However, if I want to turn that into an adverb and indicate that I want to do it thinly, you learned in lesson 8 that I can put 게 after the adjective. Now, this sentence would say that I want to cut the bread thinly. However, if you want to indicate that you want to cut the bread thinner, in English, you sort of add this to the adjective, but you don't really add anything more to the adjective here. What you want to do is indicate that, well, if it's thinner, that means it's more thin than it was before. Well, in that case, you add the word for more in Korean, which is 더. So you're going to put this here. Now, this sentence in Korean would read, 저는 빵을 더 얇게 자르고 싶어요. The next sentence I would like you to try is, our house is bigger than this house. Now, when you translate this sentence, keep in mind that I don't actually mean that you're talking about a bigger house in terms of size, in terms of height, or anything like that. But really what I'm trying to say is that the house is bigger in terms of square footage, in terms of area. Now, there's a word for that in Korean that they would commonly use, and it sometimes translates to bigger, so that's why I'm including bigger here. But another translation that you might more commonly see for this word is wider. I don't particularly like that word because in English I would never say our house is wider than this house. However, that's the word that I'm looking for in Korean. I'll give you 10 seconds and you can start now. Okay, now the subject of the sentence is our house, and the way to say our is 우리, which is just we. But if I put 우리 after that, that turns into our, and I can put 집 here. Now, in Korean, it's very common to sort of eliminate this 우리, especially in this type of situation. So I could just say 우리 집 to mean our house. Now, if I want to indicate that our house is big, I could just say 우리 집, and again, 우리 집 is the subject of the sentence, so I can put 은 here to indicate that it's the subject of the sentence. If I want to indicate that our house is big, well, as I said, I didn't actually mean the adjective 크다. That's not the word that I wanted to use because it's not usually the word that Korean people would use to indicate that a house or an apartment or some sort of place is bigger in terms of square footage. But rather what I wanted you to use is the adjective 넓다. Now, what I have here is, and I'm going to apply the informal high respect honorific here to say 넓어요. Now, what I have here is simply our house is big or our house is wide, if you'd like to translate that way. If you wanted to indicate that our house is wider or our house is bigger, you would have to, again, there's no real way to sort of attach this and this thin and bigger to the adjective itself. But what you need to do is basically, I could have said this up here, but I didn't mention it up here. You could sort of think about it as our house is more big than this house. That doesn't really make perfect sense in English, although I guess you could understand it. And if you want to directly do that in Korean, as we did in the first sentence, you want to put 더, so I'm going to put 더 here. Now, this right now just says our house is bigger or our house is wider. But what I want to do is indicate that it's bigger than this house. And I guess this house is maybe the house that I'm standing in, but it's not my actual house. So if I want to indicate that it's bigger than this house, well, I need to write down this house in Korean, and I already know the word for house, and the word for this is 이. So I'm going to say 이 집, and this would be two separate words, even though it looks like they're relatively close to each other. Now, as you learned in lesson 19, if you ever want to indicate that something is bigger or thinner or heavier or wider, or whenever you're comparing something, what you want to do is put 보다 after the thing that you're comparing. So here, this whole sentence would read, 우리 집은 이 집보다 더 넓어요. The next sentence I would like you to try is, I want to buy a higher desk. I'll give you 10 seconds, and you can start now. All right, I'm pretty excited to translate this one because even though I taught you all that you would need to know to translate this type of sentence, I don't believe that I taught you exactly this type of sentence, but hopefully you can use the knowledge from lesson 19 to translate this with me here. Now, what I'm going to do is very much like the first and second sentence. I'm going to translate just a portion of it and then add the hard part. So the easy part of this is what you can probably do before you even came into lesson 19 is I want to buy a desk. That should be easy for you, so let's do that together. First, the subject of the sentence is I, so I'm going to start by putting this here. Now, the thing that I want to buy is a desk, so I'm just going to put the noun for desk, which is 책상. I'm going to put that here, 책상. That's the object of the sentence, or in other words, that's the thing that I want to buy, so I'm going to put the object particle here. Now I want to indicate that I want to buy it. So the word for to buy is 사다, but it's not going to be 사다 because I want to, just like in the first sentence, I want to add 고 싶다 to indicate that I want to do this action. So it's 고 싶다, and I don't want to just put 고 싶다 because that's, well, I could do that if I wanted to, even though the honorifics wouldn't match up with 저 here and 싶다 because, anyways, but just like in all my sentences, I'm going to add the informal high respect because that's normally what I do here. So 싶어요. You could say 싶습니다 if you wanted to. Now this sentence right now just says I want to buy a desk. Well, that's not exactly what I want to do here. I want to indicate that I want to buy a higher desk. Well, using the knowledge from lessons before lesson 19, you could probably translate the sentence I want to buy a high desk. And if you want to do that, all you want to do is simply add the adjective here in order to describe the upcoming noun. And the adjective to be high is 높다. So I can put 높다 here, and you're probably aware, especially if you're in lesson 19, that you can't just put 높다. You have to add 은 to this. Now, this simply indicates that I want to buy a high desk. But you don't want to buy a high desk. You want to buy a higher desk. Now, as we saw in the first and second sentence, you can't really add anything to the adjective directly, even though in English that's what you do. You say thinner, bigger, wider, higher, heavier, lighter, and all that stuff. But in Korean, really what you're doing is you're saying, I want to buy a more high desk. And again, that's not the best way to say it in English, but in Korean, that's what they do. So again, this word for more, which I guess you'd go put here in English, the word for more is 더. So I'm going to put that here. Now this sentence would read, 저는 더 높은 책상을 사고 싶어요. The next sentence I would like you to try is, that textbook is more expensive than I thought. I'll give you 10 seconds and you can start now. Okay, the subject of the sentence is actually going to be that textbook. So I'm going to start by writing that here. That, I guess you could write 그 or 저, but I'm going to write 그 in this sentence. But I guess you could have written 저 if you wanted to. So 그, the word for textbook is 교과서, 교, which usually refers to some sort of school thing, 과, and then 서. I'm going to add 가 here because that's the thing that I'm sort of saying, oh, well, that's something that's not really all that I expected. But you could, in theory, write nun here, but in this particular sentence, I feel that 가 would be more commonly added to 교과서. Now, if I want to indicate that it is simply expensive, if I just want to indicate that the textbook is expensive, what I want to do is use the adjective to be expensive, and I'll put that at the very end of the sentence. 비싸다, and I'm not going to obviously not use the dictionary form, but I'll use the informal high respect form. So it says 비싸요. Now that sentence just says that textbook is expensive. I want to indicate that it's more expensive. Okay, so I can write down that it's more expensive by putting the word, of course, as we saw before, more. In English, I don't say that this sentence is, that textbook is expensiver than I thought. In this case, you actually do use the word more. So I'm going to put 더 here, as we saw in all the previous 3 sentences. Now this sentence just says, that textbook is more expensive. If I ever want to indicate that something is more than I thought, well, the word for to think in Korean is 생각하다. 생각하다. Now that's the verb to think. The noun thought is 생각. So if I'm ever talking about my thought or somebody else's thought, well, in this case, it's my thought. And especially if you're ever saying something is bigger than I thought, or wider than I thought, or lighter than I thought, or anything like that, you don't really need to say that it's my thought, because it's sort of assumed from context that it's your thought. So you're going to put 생각 here. Now, as we saw in the previous sentence, whenever something is bigger than something, or wider than something, or heavier than something, whenever you want to translate this then, you want to put 보다 on the thing that you're comparing it to. So if it's bigger than I thought, or heavier than I thought, or more expensive than I thought, you want to put thought and then 보다 after it. Now this whole sentence would read, 그 교과서가 생각보다 더 비싸요. I want to point out that you actually don't need this 더 here. It's possible to eliminate this if you wanted to, but a lot of the times Korean people would include it, so it's possible to include it as well. The next sentence I would like you to try is, I am the tallest in the class. When I say class, I'm talking about sort of a class of students, and you're going to be the tallest of, say, maybe a group of 20 or so students. I'll give you 10 seconds, and you can start now. Okay, I'm indicating that I am going to be the tallest, so I'm going to include that as the subject of the sentence. Now, if I want to indicate that I'm the tallest in the class, well, the class is, the place in which I am the tallest. So there's a lot of word for class in Korean. There's a lot of ways that class could be translated to. But if I ever am talking about a class as in a group of students, and in this case, that's what I'm saying. I'm the tallest of this group of students that I refer to as the class. The word for that is 반. Now, again, this is the place in which I am the tallest, so I'm going to add 에서 here. Now, the next part of the sentence gets a little bit interesting. The way that Korean people say to be tall, or I guess you could just say tall if you wanted to, but in English, the infinitive of to be tall, it's not one word. There's a lot of words in English, so say just tall. There's a lot of words that in English would be one word, but in Korean, it's sort of 2 words. An example that's just off the top of my head is if we have the word in English, and not to talk about toilets for very long here, but the word for to flush. To flush. Like to flush a toilet is, I flush the toilet, or I will flush the toilet. That's just one word. But in Korean, they actually sort of say it as 2 words, and if you're going to directly translate that into English, the way that Korean people say to flush is they say to lower the water, or to make the water go down. Now, that's one example of an English word that's just one word, flush or flushing or to flush or flushed or something like that, that translates to more than one word. Now, in Korean as well, tall, or to be tall as the infinitive, is actually more than one word. And what they do in Korean is they say ki, which translates to height, And they put ka, they usually put ka on ki, and that's not anything but the particle that you've learned in previous lessons. And then what they do is they put kuda, and kuda means big. So really what they're doing is to be tall is, well, what's happening when you're tall is your height is big, or your height is really, really high. That's the way that they say tall in Korean, is to indicate it like this, basically saying that one's height is big. So you could say 저는 반에서, and you could say 키가 커요, like that. But that's not exactly what I wanted to translate here, and this isn't really a perfect sentence. This just says, I am tall in my class. Well, doesn't really make sense, because you're not really indicating anything about you being the tallest or the least tall or anything like that. So you need to indicate somehow that you are the tallest. You need to indicate some sort of superlative here where you're the best, or you're the highest, or you're the strongest, or you're the smartest, or something like that. And anytime you want to indicate that you're the best of something, or the smallest, or the tallest, or the smartest, or anything like that, you need to use one of the words, either a 가장 or 제일. I'm going to use the word 제일, but you could use 가장 if you wanted to. Now, the interesting thing is, where would you put this? You actually could, if you wanted to, you could put it here, but it would sound most natural to Korean people, and to me, I guess, I'm not Korean, but it sounds the most natural to actually put it here, between height and big, which is kind of interesting, because, this is clearly, it's not one word, because it's two words. It's height and big. But in English, this would translate to one word. However, in Korean, it's funny and interesting to me, but I'm a kind of a grammar nerd, that if they want to indicate that one is the tallest, well, you'd kind of have to break this word, and it's not a word, it's two words. You have to break these two things apart. So I'm going to erase 커요, and I'm going to put 제일 between 키 and 크다. So I'm going to put 제일 here, and then I'm going to add the 커요 that I just erased. So it's 커요. Interesting. Now this sentence would read, 저는 반에서 키가 제일 커요. Well, that was fun. I hope you learned a lot.